Questions. What was the reason why the Romans did not realize how their old world was coming to an end? Answer. The fall of Rome began in 776 AD with the expulsion of the last emperor, but the fall was so slow and gradual that the Romans did not realize it long. No doubt they complained of the high prices of food, low wages of workmen, and of other sufferings caused by greedy monopolists. But the majority of the people went on in their usual way, enjoying whatever little came their way, or starving to death. They did not know that the empire was doomed. Second, in what ways did Rome make a fine show of outward glory? Answer. Though Rome was doomed, she made a fine show of outward glory. There were good roads all over the empire, kept safety by the imperial police. The frontiers were well guarded, and the whole world was paying tribute to the imperial city. A few men were even trying to bring back the good old days of the republic. How was it that Rome, as the ruler of the entire civilized world, could not endure? Answer. Rome was essentially a city-state like the city-states of ancient Greece. But as the ruler of the entire civilized world, she could not long endure. Endless wars killed her younger men and so ruined her farmers that they became either beggars or serfs, SERFs, under rich landowners. Fourth, what was the condition of the common citizen and the slaves in the ancient Rome? Answer. In ancient Rome, the state was everything and the common citizen was nothing. The slaves only obeyed their superiors, but they had no interest in the affairs of the world, which was only an abode of misery to them. Though they sometimes fought a good fight to enter heaven, they did not like fighting for the glory of an ambitious emperor. Paragraph 9. Some quarter of a century before the period with which this story deals, a certain rich and misanthropic man was seized with the bright idea for perpetuating his memory after death, and at the same time harassing a certain section of mankind. So in his will he set aside a portion of his income to be spent on an annual prize for the best poem submitted by a member of the sixth form of St. Austin's College, and subject to be selected by the headmaster. And he added, one seems to hear him chuckling to himself, every member of the form must compete. Then he died. But the evil that man do lives after them, and each year saw a fresh band of unwilling bards goaded to despair by his bequest. Thus there were always one or two who hailed this ready market for their sonnets and odes with joy, but the majority, being barely able to rhyme dove with love, regarded the annual announcement of the subject chosen with feelings of deepest disgust. Page 683. Question. What was the bright idea of the rich man? B. What was the evil that lived after the death of the rich man? C. How did the students feel at the announcement of the prize? Answer. A. The bright idea of the rich man was to perceive his memory after death and at the same time to cause misery to a section of people. So he set apart in his will a portion of his income for an annual prize. It was for the best poem by the student of the sixth form of St. Austin's College on a subject to be chosen by the headmaster. Answer B. The competition was compulsory for every student of the sixth form, so it causes misery to many unwilling students who were forced to compete. Though they could hardly rhyme, this was the evil that lived after the death of the rich man. C. The announcement was hailed by those students who could rhyme their verses properly, but the majority could not do so. Therefore, the announcement filled them with disgust. Paragraph 10. Swami Vivekananda, once speaking in America, told of a young man who came to a religious teacher and said that he wanted to find God. The sage smiled and said nothing. The young man returned time after time, even repeating his desire, his longing to find God. After many days, the sage told him to accompany him as he went to the river to take his morning bath. And when both were in the river, the sage took hold of the young man and plunged him under the surface of the water and held him there. The young man struggled and struggled to shake off his hold. Finally, the sage raised him out of water and asked him, "My son, what did you long for most when under water?" "A breath of air," gasped the youth. Thus would the wood be disciplined long after God if he would find him. If you have this longing after God, verily he shall be found by you, said the sage. Question A. Why did the young man go to the religious teacher? Answer. The young man went to the religious teacher to know how he could find God. B. What did the religious teacher do when approached for the first time? B. The first time the sage smiled but said nothing. C. Why did the young man repeat his visits? C. The young man went again and again to the sage, repeating his desire to find God. D. What was he told after many days? D. After many days, the sage asked the young man to go with him when he went to the river to take his morning bath. E. What did the sage do when the young man obeyed him? When both were in river, the sage suddenly caught hold of the young man, plunged him under water and held him there. F. What did the young man do when he was kept plunged in water? F. The young man tried his best to get free and come up to the surface of the water. G. What was the lesson that was taught to the young man by the sage? G. At last the sage let the young man come up and asked him what he had wanted most when under water. The young man replied that he had longed most for breath at the time. The sage said that he would find God if only he should long for him as earnestly as he had longed for air when under water. Page 684, paragraph 11. I think our students, especially college students, should enjoy every possible facility for acquiring an accurate knowledge of political matters and forming sound views on them. They should be encouraged to discuss such matters freely in the college and publicize those opinions are entitled to weigh, should from time to time be invited to take part in the discussion. They should be at liberty to attend public lectures and addresses on political subjects, and they may even attend political meetings with advantage, provided they are there only as spectators. But when it comes to active participation in what is called political agitation, I think we must draw the line. It is a most responsible action, and students with their immature judgments are not qualified to take part in it. The active participation of students in political agitation really tends to lower the dignity and the responsible character of public life and impair its true effectiveness. It also fills the students themselves with unhealthy excitement, often evoking in them a bitter partisan spirit, which cannot fail to interfere with their studies and prove injurious to their intellectual and moral growth. The period of 4 or 5 years which most young men spent at college is all too short a time for the work which properly belongs to it, namely properly preparing in knowledge and character for the responsibilities of life. Surely it is not too much to ask our students to exercise a little patience and self-restraint during this period and refrain from action in politics till after they had completed their studies and taken their place in the public life of the country. Questions. A. How are our students to acquire political education? Answer. It is desirable for students, particularly college students, to acquire sound knowledge of political matters and form sound opinion. Questions. How are our students to acquire political education? Answer. It is desirable for students, particularly college students, to acquire sound knowledge of political matters and form sound opinion on them. They are to do this by free discussion among themselves and with eminent public men in their college. They may also attend public lectures, even political meetings, but as mere spectators. They must not, however, take part in active politics. B. Should they take active part in political agitation? If not, why not? B. Active politics is a responsible action and students are too immature in their judgments to take part in it. It loses in dignity and responsible character if such immature people join in. Besides, active politics fills the student's mind with unhealthy passion, excitement and partisan spirit. This is harmful to their intellectual and moral growth. C. When can a person take part in the public life of the country? C. Students can take part in active politics at the end of their college career. The few years they are at college should be devoted entirely to preparing themselves in knowledge and character for the responsibilities of life. 12th. Critics have denied India's capacity for advancement of knowledge and spread of learning among her people. It had been urged that here is no true democratic spirit, that there could be no real contact between her diverse people and no continuity between the past and the present, that there is an intolerant theoretic spirit which insists on an acceptance of authority in place of diktats of reason. These assertions are as ignorant as they are baseless. In regard to the spread of learning, geographical barriers have never in the past offered any obstacle to the intellectual communion among the different people of India. The vision of the past rises vividly before us, and we behold a great procession of immortals who still live and inspire us. We see Sankaracharya acclaimed everywhere during his march of intellectual conquest of all places from the south to the extreme north. We see the scholars of Bengal with a few palm leaves manuscripts as their sole treasure crossing the Himalayan barriers, page 685. Inspired by love and service to carry Indian lore to Tibet, to China and to the farther east, the great intellectual movements were never confined to any particular province, for the torch of learning was kept lighted for many centuries in her different universities, and it was the fame of a great teacher that drew scholars from even the most distant corners of India. The traditions of the past have not been lost, for even today leaders of thought from different provinces travel from one end of the country to the other, thus keeping alive the bond of unity and close kinship. Those who have read history realize the great assimilative power of Indian civilization, by which many races and people came to regard this country as their home, and it is by their joint efforts that will be built the greater India yet to be. Question. What is the critic's opinion about India's capacity for advancement of learning? Answer. Critics hold that India is wanting in democratic spirit, and hence there is no real contact among the different classes in her people. They also hold that there is no close relation between the past and the present in India, and the people are too priest-ridden to be guided by reason. So, according to these critics, India can never advance in knowledge. B. What does the author think of it? The author says that the critics are entirely wrong in their opinion of the Indian people. What is the vision of the past that rises before the author? The author sees in his mind's eye a continuous stream of the great intellectuals of the past passing before him. He sees Sankaracharya carrying the torch of knowledge from one end of the country to the other. He sees the great scholars of Bengal across the Himalayas with their palm leaf manuscripts to carry the message of India to Tibet, China and other countries in the Far East, in the spirit of love and service. These intellectuals were not confined to any particular province but were spread over the whole country for many centuries, and a single teacher often drew scholars from the distant part of the land. What inspires the author with the hope of a greater India yet to be? Answer: even now, leaders of thought keep up the bond of Indian unity by moving about from one part of the country to another. In fact, history teaches us that India has become the home of so many races and peoples simply because of her embracing civilization. And the greater India of the future will be built up by their joint efforts. Paragraph 13. Almost all the elaborate rules regarding health and behavior which were laid out in our Old Testament had a sound basis at the time, although some of them are out of date now. We know so much more about the body now and about how to keep our cities healthy that one would think we should have solved this problem of health long ago. But our civilization goes on, more difficulties seems to arise. We get new illness which hardly existed 1,000 years ago. The more artificial the world becomes, the more difficult it is for the human body to adapt itself to the environment. The rushing motor cars not only kill and injure thousands, but make us all more anxious. Machinery does the heavy work which keep our bodies fit and strong. More and more we sit in machines and attend to machine, and the body's power of fighting disease is reduced. Also, when human beings get bored, they eat too much, smoke too much, drink alcohol and get discontented. Discontent causes unhappiness. Unhappiness causes body illness. Illness is a kind of doctors cannot cure. Page 686. Question: why should the problem of health have been solved long ago? Answer: the Old Testament laid down many sound rules of health and conduct. Though some of them are out of date at present, we know now more about the body and health. This should have enabled us to solve the problem of health. B. What makes it difficult to solve the problem of health? Progress of civilization had made the problem of health difficult. We now get diseases from every country in the world. Life has become so artificial that the body cannot adapt itself to the environment. The use of machines have reduced the body's power of resisting disease. Also, there are too much of eating, drinking and smoking and greater discontent, and these bring on all sorts of diseases. C. How does machinery brings on disease? Machines have relieved us of hard physical labor that kept the body fit and strong. We feel bored by sitting in machines, and this makes us eat and drink and smoke too much and get discontented. There are motor cars that make us all anxious by killing and injuring thousands. All these bring on physical illness and which doctor cannot cure. Paragraph 14. Sydney was one of the famous men who lived in the time of Queen Elizabeth I. He travelled a good deal in Europe, visiting France, Venice, Genoa, and meeting some of the great Italian painters of the age. At the court of Elizabeth, he was a model of what a courtier should be: polished in manners, perfectly educated, interested in all that was going on, ready to talk entertainingly on any subject, able to make and keep friends, and attractive to all who came in touch with him. He distinguished himself not only as a courtier but also as a statesman, soldier, poet and prose writer. But today we remember him chiefly as a writer. It was an age of inquiry in every direction, when men were discovering new lands, new people and new ideas. There was much to look forward to in the future, much to be enjoyed in the present, and much to be learnt from past. In English literature, as in other field of activity, men were trying to produce works that should be of as high a standard as any found in other countries in modern or ancient times. They say that the Greek and the Romans had succeeded in writing great poetry, great plays, great criticism. Why should not Englishmen do the same? Surely they could produce the same results if they followed the same methods and obeyed the same rules of writing. There was much discussion in England whether it was better for men to imitate the Greeks and the Romans or to aim at greatness through originality, using the English language in an entirely natural way. Sidney was a member of what was perhaps the leading literary club in England, and his influence was felt by all writers of his time. He advised poets to think too much about the rules of correct verse, but to look in their heart and write. Feeling, he knew, might be stronger than reason and produce better poetry. Questions. How did Sidney distinguish himself as a courtier? Sidney was perfectly educated and had travelled widely in Europe, so he could talk wisely and well on any subject. Besides, he was polished in manners, a very good friend, and attractive to everyone who came in touch with him. He was also a good statesman, soldier, poet, and prose writer. No wonder he distinguished himself so well in the court. B. Why was the age of Elizabeth called an age of inquiry? Answer. Page 687. The age of Elizabeth was an age of discoveries in every direction, in new lands, new peoples, and new ideas. In fact, people were inspired with a spirit of inquiry not only about the past but also about the present and the future. This is why the age of Elizabeth was called an age of inquiry. B. Why was the C. How did great literature came to be produced in that age? Answer. The people of England read the great works of Greece and Rome. This inspired them to shine in own literature, but in their own ways. D. What was Sidney's advice to the poets? Answer. At first, there was much discussion among Englishmen whether they should imitate the Greeks and the Romans in their methods, or whether they should strike an original path natural to their own language. Sidney was a member of the leading literary club of England and had a great influence upon the writers of his time. He knew that feeling produces better poetry than reason. So he advised Englishmen to write from their hearts and not according to the rules of correct verse. 15th. I lived first in a little house and lived there very well. I thought the world was small and round and made of pale blue shell. I lived next in a little nest, nor indeed any other. I thought the world was made of straw and nestled by my mother. One day I fluttered from my nest to see what I could find. I saw the world is made of leaves. I had been very blind. At length I flew beyond the tree, quite fit for grown-up labours. I don't know how the world is made, and neither do my neighbours. Question. Where did the bird live first, and what did it think about the world? Answer. At first, the bird lived in an egg, so its knowledge at that time was limited to the egg, and it thought that the world was small and round and made of pale blue shell like the egg in which it lived. Second, Where did it live next, and what did it think about the world then? Answer. Next, the bird lived in a nest in its mother's breast. So it thought at the time that the world was like its nest, made of straw. Third, what did it think of the world when it learnt to flutter? Answer. The bird learnt to flutter out of the nest. It saw the leaves of the tree and thought the world also was made of leaves. Fourth, what did it do when it learnt to fly, and what did it think of the world then? Answer. When the bird learnt to fly, it flew out of the tree into the wide world. It now realized that its previous opinion about the world were wrong, and that it was not possible for any bird to know what the world is made of.